compromise or settle. I'm the one behind the wheel of my life, I won't put on the gas pedal. And I push it down to the middle, till I'm on a whole new level. For personal growth, marketing, branding, and spirituality will help you turn your dreams to reality. Whatever goals you got in mind will help you reach them uncompromised. Cause we are the Uncompromised Podcast with your host, Adam Wells. So let's start the show.
All right, guys, welcome to another episode of the Uncompromised Podcast. I'm excited today. I got a really special guest, but I want to remind you, if you're listening to this on the podcast feed after it goes live, we do broadcast every episode, whether it's a solo episode or an interview, live on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn, so you can always catch us that way as well. But without further ado, I want to introduce my guest today, JC Hite. JC is the founder of Hite International. Some of you guys may know. You're like, wait a second, Adam. Wait, don't you have a business named Hite as well? Well, yes, I do. So we have a franchise with Hite International, and so we've become good friends, business partners, if you will. And JC is a guy who has inspired me in a lot of ways. And specifically just how he balances life as an entrepreneur, right? Which is a really important thing that we all get wrong in some way, shape, or form, or struggle with. I personally struggle with that, and I get it wrong more often than I'd like to admit. But it's part of the journey, is figuring out how to balance the business with family and most importantly, our faith. And so I brought JC in, and I want to pick his brain today. And so, JC, I'm going to lead in by asking you a question here. But first, I want to just say officially, welcome to the show.
Dude, thanks, Adam. Super excited and honored to be here, man. That intro, I've been on a lot of podcasts. I haven't been this hyped up jumping on one in a long time. So I'm excited to chat today. Yeah,
shout out to Joey Yak for the awesome intro. So JC, let me ask you this. Where do you stand uncompromised as an entrepreneur, as a father, as a husband?
Yeah. I think this is one of those things why we connected in business, is because a lot of these things are very aligned in both of us, right? And I think from the beginning, I grew up in a really rough childhood, and trailer park, Arkansas, drugs. My mother was married several times, and over the years, I struggle with that a lot. But for me, family is just absolutely key. We have a growing business, man. We thrive, and it's so complex and difficult, and the ups and downs. And, any entrepreneur listening to this episode knows how difficult it actually is to grow and scale. But for me, everything boils down to family and to my faith, and how those two things rise above. And actually, as we were talking before, that's kind of what I want to be known for. I don't want to be known as a great business guy that also was a dad. I want to be known as an amazing father and husband who also had a business that was successful.
Yeah. So what are some things that you do to maintain that alignment? Because I can tell you, my career in law enforcement, I feel like did not set me up very well to not be a workaholic. And part of that's, when you love your job, it's harder, right? When you love, or I shouldn't say your job, when you love the work that you do, you love the business that you own. It's hard to not get sucked into it because you enjoy it. Right. But family is so important. And you know what? The years just fly by. Right. And so when you sit here and you think, well, just this one thing, I'm going to do this one thing, I'm going to get this done, that's going to make the impact I need it to make. And then, I can finally, take this day off or whatever. Right. And that's just kind of this fallacy, this trap that we fall into. So what do you do to be intentional about finding that balance? And where do you put the emphasis first?
I think there's two aspects here that have I've really drawn into as we've grown and I've kind of matured, and I'm like failing at this every day, by the way. This isn't something I figured out, but I'm working on constantly. Number one, I have a wife that's very, very understanding, very loving, and opens up to how I do life as well, right? She understands how I do life. So some women might be almost offended how I do. I'll give you an example of this. If you go to my calendar, I literally have in my calendar date night every single Friday night. Some people might look at that and like, dude, JC, that's not romantic at all. That's not like, that's not spur of the moment. It's not this. But my wife like accepts me for who I am. She knows that like, that is my way of showing love. Like literally I am booking in my life to make sure that my priorities don't fall through the cracks, right? The same thing we do in business, right? Your VP of sales isn't like, exactly. Your VP of sales isn't like, oh, like he scheduled a meeting with me. He's only, no, it's man, I'm scheduling those meetings with the people that I love the most. And so for me, I work as a human being in a certain way. And that then folds over to my faith. It folds over to my family. It folds over to my business, and really the same avenues. So for me, I like to schedule that time in. And like a lot of people in business, I block off. So there's a couple of rules that I have. One, my dad recommended we do date night every single Friday night, pretty much without flaw, unless something crazy is going on, and we'll move it to another night. And number two is I attempt, and actually, to be frank, this interview is going to be a good reminder to me because in the last 3 weeks, I've kind of fallen out of this because work has been so crazy, is that at 4:00, I go home and I turn off my phone until after my kids go to sleep. Like my kids don't need to be on the phone. There's nothing I need. My whole family's there. If someone dies in my family, they're still going to be dead when I turn on the phone at 9:00, type of thing. Right. And again, this is about blocking off time. It's the same thing you would do if your board of advisors was in a meeting with you. You wouldn't have your phone scrolling through TikTok during that time. You wouldn't.
Great point.
And so how do we block off time for the things that we love, right? And so I've got my basketball. I've got my, again, my dates. Even if my friends say, hey, we're going to go to lunch on Saturday, I throw it in my calendar because, again, that speaks the priority. And then the third thing there is like giving ourselves leniency. I've always known, or I was taught with my dad growing up, there's always seasons. Balance is not a keeping it level at all points. It's always just about shifting it and balancing it out as you go, right? So there's seasons where I'm heavily focused on the business, and there's seasons where I have to be more focused on family, right? And pushing forward. And I'm okay with that. I'm really okay with that as well.
So during those seasons, though, I feel like those seasons are what pulls us off track, right? Because you're going to have those seasons, right, where you've got to adjust your focus on something, right? And maybe at that moment in time, business has to take the higher priority, right? The problem, and I'm just saying this from my own personal experience, right? Like I'm exposing myself here that when I have those phases and I recognize it's a phase, unfortunately, I sometimes allow the phase to become the new norm, and I fail to recognize at the moment that it's okay, it's reset time, right? Yeah. And we just push past that, and it just becomes the new norm. And so, how do you have some secret way of getting yourself back to where you need to be in alignment with?
Well, the question reminds me of one of our coaches, you and I both, and Bolaños always talks about how it's not about getting distracted. It's about learning how to get realigned in life, right? Like we're always going to get distracted, whether we're in meditation and we're focused on something and then our mind wanders and then we come back to it. And then when our minds wander and we come back to it. It's not about the wandering. It's about learning and practicing how to come back to it, right? And for me, I think we have to train. The only way we can train is be okay. And again, not be so hard on ourselves to go through this. I think priority is a difficult word. In an airplane, there's priority class, but that doesn't mean the lives of each person is different. That just means the seating is different. And so, when I think about my wife and my children, I believe the Bible says that my wife is the priority, and it is, but there's plenty of times where, hey, my wife is going to be over here alone because I need to be with the children, right? Doesn't mean my wife is less a priority. It just means that in that moment, there's something else that needs me more, in just in that moment, right? And so the business should never take priority over my family, but there's seasons where my family is okay and my business needs me more. And as long as that is not for the sake of my family, then I believe we're okay. And as you said, it's important that we learn how to autocorrect those things and become more aware of when we need to autocorrect those things, which is a lot about listening and because every season is different, every marriage is different, every partner is different, and so on and so forth.
Yeah. I love that you mentioned Jose. Jose was actually our guest on episode 6, the last episode. And yeah. And so we didn't talk specifically about that, but actually yesterday in my weekly session with Jose, we talked exactly about this topic of attention, right? And how our attention gets pulled off so many times throughout the day, right? How do we manage those distractions? How do we recognize when they occur and then bring ourselves back to where we need to be? And that's a way more complex and trained skill than you would assume, right?
Yeah, that's right. And so I've learned that, again, I'm all about my calendar, and so I optimize my calendar also every season, and I'll switch it up, and I'll delete all my meetings, and then I'll rephrase them. There's gonna be seasons where I meet with specific partners of mine on a weekly basis, and there's seasons where I don't think it's a priority right then, right? And so, and again, it goes back to my faith as well, and I'm very much a habit builder. So this is a negative thing and a positive thing. People that build habits are also can be addicts as well, right? So I have to be very careful what I do on these types of things. But it's the same thing with my Bible. I read every single morning. I go to the gym every morning. I read on the treadmill. If I don't do this, then I have to leave some point in time of the day to go back and get it done, so to speak. So again, even in my faith, I think it's perfectly acceptable to build routine and to build habit and to build systems to make sure that it keeps me on track with where I want to go and where I'm headed.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let me shift gears here just a little bit, JC. One of the things that I see a lot from entrepreneurs, business owners in general, that I think is a mistake. And I want to hear your specific experience with this. And that is that I hear from a lot of entrepreneurs, they're like, hey, you know what? If I could just push through this period, like grow my business to X milestone, right? Whether that's a revenue milestone or a number of employees milestone, or who knows what it is, right? Like there's always this, well, if I could just get there, then things will be easier. So I'm going to sacrifice this period of time right now in order to get there, because then that's when things get easy and I can start to focus on. That's a bunch of garbage, right? Let's touch on that right now.
Well, I think you said it right just there. You sacrifice certain things to make it to another point. And yes, there's gonna be times where you're focused on one over the other, but you can't sacrifice family to go in that direction. You can't sacrifice your children to go in that direction, right? Like there's gotta be a limit to what you're willing to do. And also to where you're hinting at, I've been very high in business, very low in business. Hite, we started Hite 5 years ago. We'll do 8 figures, Lord willing, this year. We'll see how the economy goes. We have 150 something direct employees, plus all of our partners and franchisees, over 200 people under the umbrella. There is at no point where adding becomes less complex. Adding people, adding revenue, adding clients becomes less complex. In fact, it becomes more and more complex. Now, the complexities change, right? You're not dealing with the 12 clients you have. Now you're dealing with 12 employees, right? The problems change, but they don't go down. I believe how you act, and people say this all the time, we're not the first one, right? Money does not change a man. It just reveals who they really are, right? And so when you're poor, you want to develop those habits and that systems. Anybody, in the Bible, like anyone can give away $1,000 who's a millionaire. That means nothing. It's about being a giver when you have nothing that proves who you are. And the giver that is giving away when they have nothing, whenever they do get something and they win, that's going to be tenfold or 100-fold, right? And so I I think that probably has to do with your family as well. If you're a crappy husband when you have a small business, just because quote unquote you're focused on the business, like I don't know that helps getting bigger. I would say that as we've gotten bigger, we've had to have more focus on, like it becomes again more complex. The temptations get more, the differences get more. Life in general gets more. When we were small, we had a little house, one car. We didn't have a beach house. We didn't like. It was a lot more simple than what it is today. And so, yeah, I would call BS on that. Again, finding that line between, okay, I got to give a little bit more attention to my business, and I need to make sacrifices for my business. Like what are you sacrificing? And I like the term "for the sake of what." I'm going to win this.
Man, when Jose asks me that question every week, right, when we're talking about whatever it is, and he says, okay, for the sake of what? Like it always throws this, like, oh man, now I really got to think about this, right? for the sake of, I'm doing this for the sake of what, right? And it potentially, the idea is it's supposed to be the same, right? That infinite purpose that we talked about in that last episode with Jose. JC, so in the last few minutes that we've got here together, I want to shift gears one more time here, and I want to talk about the faith component of our conversation, because that was a huge piece of what created an alignment with us and you and Karen and Hite in general, right? Is the mission and purpose behind Hite, like behind the scenes of, right? I mean, and forward facing, Hite International is, right, a digital marketing agency, right?
Yeah.
But behind that, it's so much more. It's business as a mission, right? And I love the idea of business as a mission. It's something that my wife, Rachel, and I are so in alignment with, which is part of the reason why we chose to partner with you guys. Yeah. So tell me, how did you decide that needed to be a focus for you guys? Yeah. And how have you taken action to be bold about your faith in business? Because I feel like a lot of people want to separate the two.
I think that, man, I could go really deep into the why and kind of my whole childhood, but we'll save the audience from that for another day. But, I find it hard to be a Christian. Well, let me back up. When you think of the disciples, they were not missionaries, right? Like they were workers, they were fishermen, they were tax collectors, they had a job, they had a purpose, right? And through that job, they were able to build something completely different and grow and scale. And I believe that as missionaries, we want to change the world, and we could do that in a lot of different ways. But I believe that this office place is the mission field. And what better way to inspire and impact people than to be the person that helps them in in all the other aspects of their lives as well. Now, it's a difficult line, especially in today's world. Like you got to be very cautious, and it doesn't call us to be foolish, business owners, but I'm very vocal. Yesterday, Adam, I prayed with 3 different people in the office. 3 different people. One of them I proposed, because every Monday morning we start the day with a prayer. So I led that one. The other 2, they asked me, right? And they were not, one was an employee of mine and one was a fellow partner of mine, right? And I think creating a culture of prayer, it also puts you in a different framework. I believe this is God's business. I'm the CEO of it. And that takes a lot of pressure off of the end game, as well, because the ending of the story has already been written, and actually the whole book has, but we already know the ending of the story, right? Which ends in heaven and us all celebrated together. And so that's a beautiful thing. So I like to integrate faith in everything I do. We don't push it. At Hite, we have atheists, we have Muslims, we have, you name it, but every single person knows where I stand and who I am. That doesn't limit your abilities, doesn't limit who you are, doesn't limit how we treat you or your values. I don't even know who's who, to be frank, in the organization, but everyone knows where I stand. And I think that's really important as people of faith, is that people do know where we stand. I feel like that's very biblical, that people are very aware. We are meant to be light of the world, not just blend in to the world. And
absolutely.
And so the business is not Christian. I'm I'm a Christian, you know, I'm a believer in Christ. And so, yeah, it's been an interesting, and it gets complex, man, because there's some, no different than the church is dealing with a lot of very complex issues, you know, from, and I won't name anything on here, but, you know, just there's a lot of complexity, whether it's drugs, whether it's sexuality, whether it's divorce, whether it's everything. This is, you know, every single thing. And
Yeah.
how Christians deal with that and how the CEOs deal with that is it's very difficult. I don't wish that on anyone. And so, yeah.
Yeah, it certainly presents a lot of challenge for sure.
Right.
But you know what, JC, I admire your boldness. I thank you for it. And it's been an honor and a blessing to be partnered with you, to get to know you better. And I appreciate you coming on today. Why don't you let everybody know if they want to connect with you, how can they do that?
My favorite place is Instagram. If you write me on there, I'll probably write you back. But Instagram, Facebook, I think I'm even on TikTok, but I don't know. I don't run that. But any of those places, you can definitely find me, JC Hite, and I should be coming up pretty quick. So.
Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and roll out of here, guys. JC, thanks again for being on the show. And guys, you know what? Do me a favor. If you're listening to this on the podcast feed after the show has officially gone live, please subscribe to the show wherever it is that you're listening to it. And more importantly, give us a review, okay? Because those podcast players, the algorithms pick that up, and that's how they determine who to share the show with, and helps us get more reach so other people can listen to the show. So thanks again for tuning in. And until next time, guys, remember to be uncompromised.